Okay, so here we are at RoxFilm, and we've got some folks from Ashes to Ashes, which we're really excited to talk to today. The folks from Skin You're In weren't able to make it, but we will talk a little bit about their film as well, because the two films tie together so wonderfully. And we wanted to get an opportunity to talk about the issues that Skin You're In talks about institutional racism, personal racism, and the way that stress really has an effect on your health, and that is what that film is all about. But we're here with Dr. Shirley and Taylor Rees from Ashes to Ashes, which is one of the most incredible films, I have to say, Taylor, to both of you, how it came about and how you created this marvelous story out of something that was just really supposed to be a documentation of an incredible program that Dr. Shirley did. So can we talk a little bit about where this film came from? Oh, I know, but you need to, and it's funny because we've had this conversation before, but these are new viewers.
Okay.
Who would be very interested, and you can give a truncated version, and then we can talk more about sort of the issues around, generational stress, and we've been talking a lot about that these past couple of days.
Okay. Around 2014, I decided that I wanted to do a funeral service for African Americans who had been lynched. And so I was told by a friend of mine who was in filmmaking that this idea of a funeral service for African Americans was historic, had never really ever been done before. And she felt that it should be documented in some way. And so trying to figure out how to do it, where to start. So we decided to have art show at my home and try to generate some money and pass on the idea to people. And Taylor's father lives around the corner from me, and Todd came. And he just felt that it was a good idea and should be, I should pursue it. And, he would do what he could to help. And he says, my daughter and her future husband, they do films and things and stuff. And she said, I talked with Taylor and see, can she help you out? And we had already, at some point, Todd and I started doing some filming of interviewing people and talk with them. And then I went to this art show. A friend of mine who used to work at a gallery in New York, moved to Massachusetts, and then she was at a gallery in Boston, and she saw Winfred work. And she felt that you need to see this guy's work. He works with cotton just like you do. So we had started filming. We went to see Winfred's work. And when I found out from Winfred that he had been in the process of being lynched, I asked him, would he come to my home in Amherst? And he asked me, did I know how to cook? And if I knew how to cook, he would come. So he said, if you know how to cook, Patsy and I'll come on up there. I said, we want to videotape and talk. Yeah, we can do that. And when Todd told Taylor felt that we shouldn't bring him to our space, go to his space. So Todd made a lot of arrangements, and we wound up going to see Winfred in 2015. I think it was around November, December, something like that.
I mean, it's just so serendipitous, and oftentimes that happens when you're sort of like, you don't necessarily go to make a certain film. It just sort of happens, right? Serendipitously, Taylor, and sort of like those aha moments when you're like, wow, this is actually bigger, and the potential to tell this incredible story is now just like completely opened up. So you must have had that when you met Winfred. It was like, we need to sort of pivot.
I didn't really believe this person is unbelievable. I said, are you sure? Because it's just, what's the chances of that happening? that you're going to be the guy, and that he would have been in the process of being lynched. And some of his paintings had lynchings in it. And it just blew me away. And that's when I said, can we talk with, will you come and let me talk with you? So that's it. And so Todd called Taylor and said, don't bring him to Amherst. You go to New Haven. So we went to New Haven, and that's where it's been. That's how. So it started out with the idea of I just wanted to have a funeral service, and that was it. Someone recommended do a film. In the process of doing, filming, I run into Winfred, and so that's how.
And Taylor takes it from there.
Yeah, Shirley describes it well. I mean,
I know.
I've never been a part of something that had a life of its own and rolled down the mountain, collecting stories and collaborators with its own life force more than this film. I was just thinking the other day, because we're sending Shirley some of this footage, but we got to visit you in your home, Shirley, and we were preparing for the memorial service. And that's, at the time it was like, oh, Shirley's my neighbor from down the street, like, we'll just document this service. It's a huge honor to me. We put together a big crew, a diverse crew of people. It was a chance to step outside of my comfort zone as a filmmaker in many ways, and really practice the art of like learning a sensitivity that I knew I didn't have in spades. And I was going to be put in a position where I needed to gather information and do some research of my own. I mean, I learned so much in this project, not just about history, but about art and about representation, about storytelling, about narratives, and about people's narratives, their own narratives. And so that was a journey in itself, working with Shirley, what she brought forth for all those actors. There's so many, it's like a very meta thing. She's working with these actors to bring stories from the past, but we wanted to capture it in real time. I wanted this to feel like the film wasn't just about Winfred's past or about Shirley's funeral, about the past. This was about Winfred and Shirley, two amazing human being activists, artists in our time right now, giving such voice and unique perspective to something that clearly we need all of, if not more of. We filmed with Winfred a couple of times, and I remember calling Shirley many times, not just once or twice, but like how, as Shirley, I don't exactly know how I'm going to weave these stories together. We didn't have a ton of footage to go off of, but I think, we brought on writer, director Allison Davis from LA, who is a Black writer, Cameron Granger as well. And just, with a greater team, really dialed in, I think, what was at the heart of Shirley's journey, of the friendship between her and Winfred. And that was kind of how it happened. It felt, well, I don't know how it felt. It happened.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the what I see as sort of like a really strong theme throughout this film, and the connection to the skin you're in, which is, Winfred was this incredible, resilient individual who survived something that for many of us was unsurvivable. And that you live with that trauma. He was almost lynched and almost castrated, and the crowd turned away for some other reason at that 1 minute, and he survived it. But you never survive it, right? It lives in your memory and it lives in your mind. So I want to talk a little bit, and Dr. Whitaker, maybe it's something that you can really address, because you really felt like in order to do this funeral for all of the people that had been lynched was really important for healing, for us and for your community.
I have this belief that as a physician, I always say, in order to help my patients to heal, it's imperative that I know their history. If you walk into a doctor's office and they don't talk with you or ask you about you, I advise you to get up and walk out, because it's, as far as I'm concerned, in order to bring it all together and bring some healing, you must acknowledge when possible, unless a person's in a coma or something, you need to know that history, because it ensures a better possibility of bringing on some healing to that person. And I felt that, I always say ashes to ashes is not just African-American history, it's American history. And I feel this country has a lot of healing to do. And I feel the first step is to acknowledging some of the things that happen in order to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I say through, as far as Winfred is concerned, as far as what he, and not only with lynching, the person is harmed, but it's just like a stone hitting a pond, the ripple effect. Because Patsy will tell you what pain she went through. She asked, why did they do this to him? And it hurts her that they did this. And so the ripple effect is present,
Right.
not only for the individual, but those that in the midst. And just think of so many, over 4,000 or 5,000 documented lynching in America. And so many of those people never got, I say, the ashes of the healing for that person or the family, because a part of the act of lynching is to instill fear. Right. And that fear results in so many health issues, as you're talking about. And there's one thing I always think about is the fact that you have your DNA. At the tip end of your DNA is something called telomere. And the purpose of the telomere is to protect the DNA. That telomere is shortened with stress.
Mm-hmm.
And if the DNA is altered, then you see all these health problems show up.
Right.
The DNA become very sticky and it cannot perform like it should.
And that's, I mean, in that, and that's the sort of like understanding that we all need to have. And it's like this whole thing about, you know, we had run a series and we had talked a little bit about this and basically saying, you know, it's not your fault. Like, it's not your fault that these are the health issues that are happening in your community. These are things that were designed, you know, these places were created and access wasn't given. And therefore, these are the things that have happened in order to increase the stress in your communities and creating these health issues and ultimately death if it's not taken care of. The one thing that's really interesting in this film is, first of all, I love the fact that Winfred's a Star Wars, like,
oh yeah,
like adored Star Wars, which I think that's, and maybe that's about living in an alternate world. I don't know, but you know, he worked so hard on that piece of leather. And I think, Taylor, you had said that, you know, that piece of leather and working on that for art should have been a healing thing. And I think in the film it came out that it wasn't for him. Can you, and you captured that so beautifully. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because oftentimes we equate the two, art and healing, but for Winfred, it was something different.
This is, I think, my favorite question. No, it's the best, because I think it's the most rich and the most full of mystery and maybe not all the answers. But I would say, like, the process of living with Winfred on a number of occasions, of learning from him, of seeing his process with art, of the many film tours we got to all do together, and seeing that, you know, it confirmed in me less that art is healing or is not healing, and more that healing is not an end. It's not a definition. Like we actually never really get there. There's not a state. Well, maybe there is. Maybe there are some people out there who are just like, and I'm healed and I'm great, and like, I don't, like, no ancestral trauma, nothing, like no, you know, at all. Like, good. I think what Winfred really showed me in his honesty, that this thing that he was compelled to do, which was addressing his pain, and the collective pain of his community, of our shared history, he wasn't doing it and being like, I can't believe I don't feel amazing every day. He was compelled to do it because being on a journey of looking at what hurts, of looking at where we as a society, as a people, have hurt each other, what those scars look like, how they're alive today, how they're being recreated today, how we can talk about that through art, through conversation, through education. Like that is healing, because it's not an end state where you feel good necessarily, but it's like a deep listening and observation and willingness to be brave to communicate. And I learned that so deeply from him and from Shirley. And so that question is my favorite. I don't have an answer, but I really enjoy that the film leaves that question a little bit open-ended. And I hope that people, wrestle with that too, because I think in some ways we're all, working through stories and working through art to process what is personal, what is collective. And it's the journey that matters, and it's staying committed to it, as Winfred did to the very last day of his life. He was still working on that art. And
Taylor, you're so right there, right? Because it is all a journey, and doing your art, people do it for all sorts of different reasons. And for me, when I heard that about, because I'm in the art field, I'm like, right, that makes sense. And then I thought, what an incredibly selfless man to want to create this leather work for his life and telling his story and telling his journey, knowing full well that it was going to continue to make him sick, because he felt so strongly that story gets told. And you're right. So we're talking about, equating that with storytelling and sitting down and having a conversation with someone. We need to have these open lines of communication. With him, it was doing this leather work, and that's how he could sort of process that. Although it made him sick, Dr. Whitaker. It made him sick every time he did it, because it would bring back all of that trauma.
And I did, and I asked him, because, we're taught that if people do certain things, it helps to release the pain and work through. But he told me that never had happened for him. And that he was constantly being traumatized, because think about when you close your eyes at night, if some people stand there with a noose to finish what they started. And the last time I talked with Winfred, he just said, I just want to be able to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
He 2 hours a night with medication, so he never in 40 some years was able to have a good night's sleep. And so it just, the trauma for him was non-ending, but he wanted to create, to give the people and to teach them, and as I learned from him so many times. I never knew there was 3 stages to lynching. And I had done a whole program on lynching, but he told me about the 3 stages, and I never knew that. He's always trying to teach me something, which is really nice. So,
I think that, with films like this and the film that screened with this, The Skin You're In, we have to be constantly reminded that there is this systematic racism in this country, right? That people were denied access and continue to be denied access to, whether it's health, quality of life, housing, and that directly affects how you live and your quality of life, and how generationally you live in this space. And I think about Ashes to Ashes, and I think about Skin You're In, and you try to reconcile it, right? You try to reconcile it. So what is it for the two of you that you feel like this film did for you to sort of bring you to a place where Taylor, you've talked about understanding more about what went on, but really about to a place where you feel like we've done something. We've actually created and explained and supported this idea that people need to understand that this is a problem, and it continues to be a problem. And Winfred is a piece of that history and a piece of that storytelling.
I can jump in. It does bring me joy that I know that this film has been seen by people who are very unaware of this history. And I've gotten a lot of responses, and that makes me happy that it's like starting a journey for those people. Personally, I'm just ignited, and and I just think there's so much work to be done until we're actually going to feel like collectively reconciled with this, until there really are reparations, until people really are living with equal privilege, if we can imagine that. So until that work is done, I don't really feel that calm. Really, I feel very fired up. And so I'm glad that the film is helping to fire people up. I think the film means different things to different groups of people. I know the film is also it's really sad and it's really difficult. You know, Shirley, I remember when we were talking about how we were going to include those images from real lynching, and, you know, how do we, I mean, the use of images of violence against the Black body, against bodies of color, you know, it's not something to use lightly. And so what was the purpose? What was it going to elicit, and in what for different people of different backgrounds? And, you know, I appreciate what Shirley said in that case. Because I could say, you know, from being of a white background and a mostly white upbringing, I knew what it was going to do to that community. And there was a fine line between making sure it wasn't just going to be like, whoa, shocking, but really like stirring and asking people to be reflective. And Shirley said, you know, her work was a funeral, was a memorial service, and it wasn't intended to shy away from that space of where violence and death and pain originated, and what spiritual practices can do to heal it. So I don't know, I'm getting a little off topic, but that was all a part of that learning journey for me of reconciling with truth. And the journey, you know, continues.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, that whole reconciliation with the truth. And, you know, Dr. Whitaker, with the funeral and doing it in the Springfield Amherst area, and really sort of, you know, you had a lot of buy-in from people who were like, we're here with you. We want to do this. We want to honor those victims of the lynching. So how did that make you feel? What was that for you on your journey in bringing closure to this by this? And it's not a simple act. It's really incredible to have thought of that, and to create this funeral so that people, one, would understand what went on in this country, but also for Black people who and their families who never had the opportunity to heal from that.
You know, when I saw the hearse coming down one of the main street to take the casket to the church, people lined the streets, and it was just like they was mesmerized by it. And you know, a part of the service was that at the end, I had so many layers to this, and at the end, you see Cameron, one of the camera guys, you know, throwing the petals of the rose petals. That was when I said, my husband, cousin's undertaker, and he says, how you gonna have a funeral and you don't have a burial? And I'm saying, oh my God, now I got to do it a burial. But that was ashes to ashes, about laying those ashes on that casket. But you know, it was just, we had an undertaker to come and make it look just like a real funeral, such that people came the next day to the church to see it.
Wow.
They came the next day to come to see the gravesite, and it was all, you know, part of the fixture that we'd done to, as I said, ashes to ashes. That was the ending of it. But the people, when I saw the people in the audience, people were just, to this day, people tell me that they still listen when hear Richard Moore saying, I did not have a choice. People repeat that to me. So it moved them so, the pain, that they began to realize what families had gone through, which I think is so important, that we underestimate that you lynched this person and you wouldn't allow the families to have those bodies as another way of torturing you. And for certain cultures, the funeral is, most groups, that is a way to bring some closure, but so many never had closure. And so when I did ashes, that wasn't, the funeral service wasn't only for the ones who were lynched, but their families and the ones that are still here and still have the pain and still hide the fact that family members were lynched. So it's important that when I hear people, they're sending me notes about how the film, I got one last week from a lady in Europe saying how she had seen the film and what it had done for her. And I hope that it will help some healing. But the thing is that you gotta be able to accept the fact that there's history that needs to be told.
Right.
And now we're at a point in this country where they don't want you to talk about that history. But I am determined that the history will be made heard.
And it's, both of you are determined. I mean, that's the wonder. I mean, we need more people like you. I mean, Taylor, I know you're working on a new film about the Native American community. I mean, it's so important that, and I say this a lot, well, especially during the film festival because it's an independent film festival, but that you know, independent filmmakers are so important to the ecosystem of our lives, because you all are telling these stories, and media and video is such an important way for us to share the stories. Like you're talking about a woman in Europe seeing this film. It's history that hasn't been told, right? So we're unearthing this and giving voice to the voiceless, and I think that that's so important in all of the work you're doing. And I know, Dr. Whitaker, that you are also an artist. And you use, you know, you have that painting, I think, behind you is one of yours that you created. And I think that it's important that we, you know, have these outlets to tell these stories, whether it's through visual art or whether it's through, you know, video art, documentary art, and then to share them with the wider world.
That's very important to me. I use my art to try to add on some history. I finished a piece within the last week on, you know, people talk about Jim Crow, but very few knew about the jelly bean jar. And that in order to vote, you had to count the number of jelly beans in a jar. A lot of people never knew that. They think, what is this jelly bean jar? And they had to count the number, and they knew they would never know the answer, therefore they would never vote. So I did this painting about that, and I want people to realize, I'm doing this thing now, spreading the ashes and unbraiding the noose. And that part of the unbraiding the noose is education, that those parts of our history that we need to be aware of, that people think of the water fountain, we all know that, but very few of us know about the jelly bean jar.
Well, and the jelly bean jar people use all the time.
Yeah.
It's like one of those lottery things where you have so many jelly beans, no one even knows where that comes from. So there's all these things that came from that time period that we use in everyday life that we don't know it has this total negative connotation. So I mean, and that's the crux of it, right? Is sort of the education. So we don't have much time. So I just want to thank the both of you for your continued fight and your continued work to elevate these voices and the human rights work. It really is. It's like this human rights work and this true humanity work that both of you do to bring forward and help us understand, you know, and educate us on sort of like, you know, the things that have been buried for so long that we need to know. And I look forward to, and I'm sure other people will, Taylor, your work and Dr. Whitaker's work. And Thomas is here from the Skin You're In. Who just joined us from the Skin You're In.
Hello.
So we're just basically concluding our conversation, Thomas.
Oh.
So oh no, but that's okay. That's okay. If Taylor and Dr. Whitaker can stay on a couple more minutes. So we were just basically, welcome. This is Thomas from the Skin You're In. And we were really, I don't know if you got to see Ashes to Ashes
I didn't. Unfortunately, I had a combination of a Father's Day thing and also a time zone issue, not realizing that I now live in the Central Time Zone, not in the
Oh,
East.
Oh, you live in Central Time Zone now.
I do
Well,
now.
we're happy to have you on. And if Taylor had to go, because I know she's working on a film, but we just were really talking about how connected your film Skin You're In is with Ashes to Ashes, which is really about about Winfred Rembert, who survived a lynching and a castration, and how sort of generational trauma and creation of stress really alters the way that you live in this world. And he was sick, and he had diabetes, and he had issues, and a lot of that, as Dr. Whitaker brings forward in the film, and Taylor, who's the filmmaker, brings forth as well, that a lot of that is not self-made, it's man-made or world-made. Like, living in that sort of space causes those sorts of things. And Skinner did a wonderful job of doing that, is explaining to us the stages of racism, or the different types of racism, I should say, not stages. And that was really important for us to learn, and using them as learning opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. We've organized society in such a way that the inequities are predictable, and we can only change that if we change the embedding of racism into our culture.
Exactly. And for your film, I mean, it focuses, Dr. Whitaker, on Brownsville and Brooklyn, and how that community has been traditionally, underserved in all sorts of ways. From, in much like many urban communities that don't have access to food or access to housing, a lot of violence, where you're constantly living on a high level of stress, which we talked a little bit about, with the high levels of adrenaline and cortisol that are constantly going through your system, and you are constantly, living on this level that's not healthy. And how do we continue to survive that and be resilient as a people when we don't really? We were talking to another group of folks. We were talking about some films not too long ago, just about how we don't seek mental health, right? We don't seek therapy and mental health as Black people.
I think that people may not seek something that they don't feel they have. They may not think that they have these problems, but we know that with the studies, like I was telling you about the telomere, and that that constant stress of shortening the telomere, which protects the DNA. But studies have shown that babies born to mothers who are traumatized, the telomere is real short, but with change of certain environmental things, the telomere can recover. And that's important to realize, that if certain situations are modified or changed, but you've got a race of people who has the norepinephrine, the epinephrine, the cortisol, constant, you don't have the circadian rhythm, is basically not there. And I think that's important, because it is not there. You do have problems with what they call sleep apnea, which precipitates diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and all these other problems that we see. But I think first you have to recognize there is a problem. But to us, we don't think, we've been traumatized by this for so long, that we don't, that's our new normal. Us over 400 years of it, that's a long time. And the fact that you can, even, I think it just should get some, I tell people I walk every morning, that's my therapy, because I may not be, it's not coming on a letter telling me that these are stress. I know they probably passed on over time, because of the fact that I don't do much to improve my regrowth, nurturing of my telomere. So I think that if those things can be addressed, that it might help. But as you said, some of the problems are chronic. And once they're in the chronic stage, it's really hard to have them return to normality. But with certain modification, hopefully you can improve them some.
Yeah. I think the stress of the social conditions under which many African Americans live, certainly not everyone, but many African Americans live.
Too many.
requires, requires this high level of resilience and active coping. And the problem is that everyone has only a certain well of resilience in them, right? So if you're in a situation where you are constantly having to draw on those reserves of resilience, this is where you start to see telomere lengths being affected by this constant assault to our bodies by virtue of the stresses that we live under. So it's really it's about being resilient, and certainly we need to we certainly need to strengthen that. But too much reliance on resilience can also be dysfunctional. That people shouldn't have to be so resilient, because we shouldn't be in conditions where we're constantly facing this kind of stress and these assaults on our bodies and in our lives.
Part of the resilience, in order to have that, the cortisol and all these things are being stressed to provide us with that resilience. And the thing is that I think it should be built in, finding ways to know it's there. I mean, it's 400 years that it's a new normal for us, in order to deal with the fact that if you're a mother of children or a Black son in America, you got a certain fear, I think, is always there, and that cortisol is hovering. And over periods of time, I think it's there, and I think that it takes, just in general, it's so normal for us to adjust and live with the constant fears. Because I have a son, and I know I have that constant fear. Phone ringing late at night, I'm scared. That means you're at a certain level of stress that's there. And I think that find a way to deal with that. If not, I always say that if the body is abused, it will let you know at some point in time.
I mean, it's really interesting you say that, because they talk a lot about that in The Skin You're In, about it, like we were talking about with Ashes to Ashes. It's this generational stress that you have a parent has a child, and that parent is then stressed about that child. And then that child has a child who's stressed about that child, because you're living in an environment, in a community that is not healthy or isn't safe. So you're passing on this generational stress, and no one's getting support for it. And so how do we then reclaim our communities so that we break this chain, that we interrupt it?
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think the focus needs to be on the source of the stress, not on, so certainly in the short term, we need to focus on making sure that people are resilient while they're living through that. But ultimately, what we need to do is we need to change the culture. So it's 400 years in this country, but as Black people, Black Americans, we created a culture to survive, right? The culture, Black American culture, evolved out of the Middle Passage, when you had an amalgam of many different African cultures all together in one slave ship, trying to deal with the same insanity. So they did what people do, which is they created a culture. And they created a culture designed for survival, and they survived. And they survived that, and slavery, and Jim Crow segregation. And
at a price.
This is a massively successful culture, right? Because it survived a 4-century-long genocidal attempt. The problem, however, is that it was created for the purpose of surviving the insanity, and that culture is resilient to that insanity, but only to a point. This idea that Black doesn't crack, Black don't crack sounds good, and you may think that when you see Angela Bassett and a lot of these actors who don't see that stage. But Black does in fact crack. That is a myth, right? Black does crack, and if you look at the life expectancy differences between Black Americans and every other group, that tells you that Black does crack, right?
They may not crack on the outside, but they're cracking in the inside.
Yeah.
There's cracking going on. But
so what's the solution to this? Because we need to break that generational stress. We need to create spaces. And I know that we, at RoxFilm, we run a healing arts panel and conversations around, using films as a catalyst to have conversations around health and well-being and mental health. And, one of the things that we did discuss was sort of like reclaiming these urban spaces and learning how to taking over lots and cooking your own food, or making sure that there's like outdoor walks and people, and creating communities that can help people, do other things like the art projects that kids were doing to keep kids off the street. You like basketball, you're in this basketball camp. Do you like gymnastics, you're in this gymnastics camp. So the community, in Brownsville, you talk about the community now reconnecting and finding ways to bring the young people into something that's much more productive than being on the streets.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, those are all positive things, but ultimately it's at a broad societal level. And when you look at some of the challenges that we're facing right now in the political realm with the voting suppression, this is all an example of how racism gets embedded in the society, and then we have to be resilient enough to be willing to stand online for 8 hours to vote. Right? So this is what we're talking about. So ultimately, the solution is, yeah, we should give people bottles of water and snacks while they're waiting for 8 hours to vote. That's the short-term solution. But the long-term solution is we need voter laws that are fair and just. Right? So we have to fix the society, fix the culture. Not as much, as more so than focusing on fixing the people.
I think that you have to, chew chewing gum and walk too. Individually, I think we need to come up with something. And in the society, you can wait to say we're going to change America. But while we're in the process of doing that, finding things that may strengthen people without requiring all this stress. And I think that's because you got to do both of them. We can't wait another 400 years trying to straighten out America. That's going to be tough. But I think that in the meantime, what can individuals do? What can they do to get the telomeres back where they normally should be? And what are the things, if it's breathing, if it's walking, if my patients can't walk outside, I say walk around in your house in a circle, wear it down. But immediately ways to first acknowledge that there's a possibility that you have post-traumatic stress of some kind. And I think it's passed on over 400 generations. No way we did not survive. We survived without bringing this with us, because these are survival techniques. But the good side, it helped us to survive, but at what price? And the price is it shows up somewhere at some point. You cannot stress this system without it not showing up. And I can rest assured it will show up at some point and some time. That's what I feel, if the stress is persistently there. So you got to give people some tools to deal with things now, and tools to deal with their environment, such as why should they vote, and getting them to vote, because that's trying to change the whole system. But in the meantime, you got to work with the individual in some respects to give them something to hold on to. They may not even realize, they don't know what a telomere is. They don't know where it is, and that's all right. But tell them the things they need to do to strengthen that. So their DNA will be strong.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think that Skinner touches on that, and I think that it's a hopeful story that says that the community has figured that out, and now they're changing. And now they're offering resources, and it should be a model for other urban communities that are dealing with the same thing, and bringing in, getting rid of food deserts and bringing in real nutritious food, teaching people how to eat right, to grow their own food in their backyard. And if they can't grow it in their backyard, then they grow it on their windowsill. If they can't grow it on their windowsill, then let's teach them how to do it indoors. But, sort of like just even a little bit changing that mindset, as Dr. Whitaker says, to give people individually a way that they have control over their lives, in a way that so much of that control was taken away by just creating structures and boundaries around people in communities like Brownsville, to help them think, I am valuable, my life is valuable, and we're not going to put up with the things that have kept us down or hurt us or are killing us anymore.
Absolutely. I would agree. And I think, I mean, you touched on one of the points that I did want to bring this out, but you actually touched on it in your comments, Lisa, which is that, you know, Brownsville is the vehicle that was used to tell the story because I grew up there and it was part of my own personal journey. But there are Brownsvilles in every city and town in this country. I mean, there are Brownsvilles everywhere. So it's not so much specifically about that specific community, but
Right.
rather it's communities like that because there's a Brownsville in every city. In fact, Roxbury at least used to be sort of a Brownsville, but the last time I was there, it seems like it's changed quite a bit.
It
So,
has changed. But this is the thing, right? All of these communities are changing. They're gentrifying not for us, but for other people. And
Right.
so, as Dr. Whitaker says, like, what tools are we using? What resources are we giving for people on the ground in those spaces now to reclaim their space and own that space, so that it doesn't come in and get taken over by other people? That it's not going to be for them, but it's going to be for others. I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but Skin You're In does that. There's a lot of other films out there that does that and talks about that. And in doing that, we reduce our stress because we're doing things for us and things aren't being done to us, right? So we're little by little, one at a time, we're giving individuals agency in order to take control over their own lives by giving them ways to make their, grow their own food or housing, how to do home ownership and buy a home and all of that sort of things and working with banks. So
and
I wish we had forever to talk about this, but we don't. We're gonna have to end the Q&A. But these conversations are so important, and um, your films are what make these conversations happen, right? And we can't thank you enough for that opportunity, for the ability to use these films to do that. And we often at RoxFilm we have different series. We throw films together just for conversation, and we'll definitely be looking for these films to do just that in the future, because I think they're conversations that continually need to be had.
certainly.
Can I
Thank you.
just say one last thing? Is that I always look back to see how we survived. And I grew up in a small country town, and I remember everyone watched you because they felt that your growth was that they needed to help you to survive. And so that was, I think, important way that a lot of Blacks, survived. Where my little small towns where I'm from. When I got chicken pox in the second grade, I looked out the window and there was 5 people standing out there with remedies to help me to not die from chicken pox. But that's because the community heard if someone's child was sick, everyone felt their child was sick and they would come. And I think that gave me a sense that people cared about me and gave me the support and strength I needed. And I think we lost that. I think some places, but I
Yes,
think that is not a bad thing to strengthen and bring back.
yes, and it's happening. And I think places like Brownsville are doing that, and that's exciting.
That's good. That's nice.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Thomas, for jumping on. We're so glad. This was a great conversation, with you, jumping on, and then having Dr. Whitaker be able to meet you and have a conversation with you too. So thank you for finding, sorry about the Central Time. But really, congratulations to you both on your continued work, your advocacy, your support for our communities, and to help make them healthy, and bring some sense of wholeness to them. So you are applauded for that. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you for creating this forum for us to show our work. Greatly appreciate
Oh, it's our pleasure. Absolutely our pleasure. So have a rest of your wonderful Father's Day. I hope you do. And have a wonderful summer, both of
it.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.